United States of America, the most militarily powerful and richest nation in the world, by far the country with the greatest global projection capacity in history. With a unique and almost omnipresent geopolitics that spreads to every corner of the planet, the United States thus remains the most powerful and influential country in the world. In today's video, we will once again explore the geopolitical aspects of the United States of America. But before that, don't forget to support the channel by subscribing and sharing the video with everyone you know. Your help is essential so I can keep bringing content about geopolitics, history, organized crime and security. I'm Geopolitica Mundial and this is Geopolitica Mundial. The so-called continental part of the United States of America is located in North America, bordering Canada to the north and Mexico to the south. With the Pacific Ocean to the west and the Atlantic Ocean to the east. However, there is also Alaska in the Arctic Circle region and in the central region of the Pacific Ocean, the Hawaiian archipelago. The United States originated in its eastern part, a region bounded by the Appalachian Mountains, which isolated those 13 British colonies and protected them from the French territories to the west. After their independence in 1776, the newly independent 13 colonies would sign the agreement with the British Empire, which, in addition to recognizing their independence, would also receive territories between the Great Lakes, the Appalachian Mountains, and the Ohio and Mississippi rivers. The strategic vision and long-term perspective of the American elite would become clear with the arrival of the 19th century, especially when the United States would begin the race to the west. It began in 1803 with the purchase of the Louisiana territories, which belonged to the French in the central part of the continent. This acquisition of Louisiana was a long-term goal of President Thomas Jefferson, who was especially eager to gain control of the Mississippi River from the city of New Orleans. Moreover, from this flat region, the United States was already envisioning the long-term strategy of reaching the Pacific Ocean. The purchase of the Louisiana territory would lay the foundation for the geopolitical core of the present-day United States. Consolidated thanks to the Mississippi Basin, which connects the country vertically, with access and control in the south from the Gulf of Mexico to the north to the Atlantic through the Great Lakes region. This would give the United States the necessary means to, in the future, pursue the role of a global superpower. After all, this natural system of interconnected rivers in the central region of the United States enabled two fundamental factors in the region's development process. First, this is an irrigation system that supports the largest continuous territory of arable land in the world, and second, because they are navigable rivers. The cheap and fast transportation of regional production, enabling the United States to achieve self-sufficiency in food production while at the same time developing its industrial and financial capacity. In 1819, taking advantage of the fact that Florida was becoming too expensive for the Spanish crown to maintain, the United States managed to obtain this territory from Spain in exchange for resolving border disputes in the Texas region. With this acquisition, the United States closed off its southern coastline, protecting the vital Mississippi Basin with the Florida Peninsula. And thus, they were able to stimulate trade with the entire Caribbean region and South America. This, in turn, would encourage the United States to implement the so-called Monroe Doctrine in 1823, which was based on three main principles: not allowing the creation of new European colonies in the Americas, not allowing non-American countries to intervene in the internal affairs of American countries, and the United States not intervening in conflicts related to European countries, such as wars between countries and their colonies. This idea promotes a position of isolation for the United States regarding European affairs, while at the same time paving the way for them to consolidate the Americas as their sphere of influence. This idea is more the consolidation of a geopolitical mindset than an actual diplomatic or military doctrine in practice. since at that time the United States was simply too weak to stand up to the British Empire or the French Empire. In all cases, it will be clear that the main actor on the American continent was the United States, rivaled only to some extent by the Empire of Brazil and the Empire of Mexico. The latter, in particular, being a possible direct threat to the southern United States. This is why Washington would support the independence of Texas in 1836, ensuring that the Texan territory would serve as a buffer state against possible Mexican aggressions that could threaten the geopolitical core of the United States, starting from the Mississippi Basin. However, this rivalry would evolve until 1845, when Texas decided to join the United States, fearing a Mexican invasion. However, this annexation brought with it the territorial disputes between Mexicans and Texans, which triggered the Mexican-American War in 1846. This war marks the second major military milestone in United States geopolitics. As victors, they gained recognition of Texas and annexed California. Nevada, Utah, and parts of Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, and Wyoming. This greatly expands the territory of the United States and finally gives them free access to the Pacific Ocean. However, there was a major problem in this newly acquired region, which was the low population. But fortunately for the American leaders, this is reversed with the discovery of huge gold deposits that drive immigrants from the east of the country to go west. In addition to attracting immigrants from all over the world to the region, which in a very short time would become the country's second largest population center. In other words, the consolidation of this geographic shape greatly benefited the United States, with the Great Lakes to the north and the Appalachian Mountains to the east, which protected the population centers in the eastern part of the country, giving New York, Washington, Philadelphia, and Boston enough security and stability to develop without having to worry about military threats from foreign countries. Meanwhile, the western population centers, which include cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco, were protected by several extremely hostile deserts and also by the Rocky Mountain Range, a factor that would inhibit any possible Mexican ambition to one day try to resurrect its empire and retake its northern territories. In other words, simply no. There simply aren't any military actors in North America capable of threatening the United States. Also, even if there were, geography protects its territory enormously, allowing it to focus on building its internal industrial and agricultural base almost untouched. These would be boosted by a huge and efficient railroad network, connecting strategic ports on the two main oceans of the world at the same time. Once again, luck favored the United States in 1867, when the Russian Empire, tired of maintaining its expensive and unproductive colony in Alaska, saw the risk of the British Empire invading the region as a threat. To prevent this, it decides to sell the region to the United States. From here, they could not only form a geostrategic arc in the Northeast Pacific Ocean, which would serve to protect their west coast, but also, in the future, it would serve as a bridge to project themselves across the far north of the planet. This nation would reach the late 19th century, having direct access to Asian markets and the west of the Americas from its west coast, and direct access to Europe, Africa, the Mediterranean Sea, and the eastern part of the Americas from its east coast. But another geographic benefit of the United States was the fact that it sits on a vast amount of mineral, energy, and strategic resources within its own continental territory. And this internal and direct access without major risks would still guarantee the country energy self-sufficiency, which combined with historical, economic, and cultural factors would drive its rapid industrial development, without having to worry too much about importing oil, gas, or coal, and even less about possible naval blockades by other nations. Curiously, oil was so abundant in North American territory and so close to the surface in some areas of the United States that there was no need for major investments or technology to exploit this resource. the equation of a nation supplied by a sea of energy with enormous mineral and agricultural resources without external threats. With a culture of deep research in technological development and a state that partners with ambitious big capitalists, there could be no other result than an extremely powerful nation. By the end of the 19th century, still in the 1890s, it would surpass in industrial production the then greatest power in the world, the British Empire. And in 1898, the United States made it clear that the Eurocentric world order was finally coming to an end with two important actions. First, with the annexation of the distant territory of Hawaii, which would serve as the main base of the American Navy in the Pacific, directly projecting the country's power into Asia, and with the Spanish-American War, where for the first time a non-European nation defeated a European empire on the defensive in its own territories. Thus, projecting itself over Cuba secures American safety and dominance in the Caribbean, Guam and the Philippines, which increase its ability to exert pressure and influence over Southeast and East Asia. Another important acquisition from the Spanish-American War is Puerto Rico, which becomes an unincorporated territory of the United States. Thus, from Guantanamo in Cuba and Puerto Rico, the American naval forces gain enough structure and operational capacity to deny access to the Caribbean region to other non-American or hostile forces, forming a powerful defensive arc from Florida to Panama, passing through the Caribbean, which protects the geopolitical core of the United States, while also providing the unique bioceanic capability that the country has, which truly makes it a global superpower. It's no coincidence, the issue of the Cuban Revolution. Decades later, it was something extremely sensitive for United States foreign policy, especially with Cuba getting closer to the Soviet Union. And it's no coincidence that the United States maintains the Guantanamo base on the far east of the island. However, the real turning point in the projection of United States power actually comes with the construction of the Panama Canal in 1913, giving the United States Navy a capability for mobility that was unique in world history. Thanks to the construction of the Panama Canal, naval travel time was reduced by at least 90%. With the ability to mobilize both its merchant navy and its military navy between the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean from the Isthmus of Central America without having to go through the Drake Passage south of Chile and Argentina, around the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa, or even through the Suez Canal in Egypt. This unique configuration makes the United States the only country in the world whose geopolitical core is partially located outside its own territory, consolidated by the Mississippi Basin, the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean, and the Panama Canal. Thus, it can be seen that with the Mississippi River running almost vertically and connecting the Gulf of Mexico in the south to the Great Lakes. In the north, where can you access the North Atlantic via large rivers? The United States forms a kind of access to the Atlantic Ocean, which also makes it possible to reach the Pacific Ocean to the south through the Panama Canal. This fact ensures that the United States has an extremely agile and flexible navy, whether it is merchant or military. And because of this absurdly long coastline, it means that any nation that eventually tries to blockade the United States would need to have a navy large enough to block many access points simultaneously. Something that to this day has simply never happened. Based on this, the structure of the United States geopolitical thinking, as well as its geostrategic planning, is practically the same as that of the British Empire, only differing in its degree of projection. And not by coincidence, but rather due to two special factors. First, obviously, since the United States was part of the British Empire, it directly inherited its culture and way of thinking. And second, its geographic isolation is, to some extent, equivalent to that of the British Isles, but on a much larger scale. In other words, just as the English use their geographic distance to have a fast and precise geostrategy, To take advantage of the internal divisions of European states, the United States does the same, but on a global scale. It's no coincidence that their geopolitical orientation is partially influenced by Mackinder, whose video I've already explained here on the channel and will leave in the video description, as it will still be based on an alternate and deeper adaptation of Mackinder's thinking, which was proposed by Alfred Thayer Mahan. Which means that the line of United States geopolitics will take advantage of its isolation. By not having to worry about the need to spend resources on land defense, the United States can then concentrate its forces on naval capability to focus abroad, to then project its power precisely through a powerful navy across Eurasia and Africa, taking advantage of the internal rivalries of the countries on those continents, choosing allies according to its convenience and need. Therefore, despite the pro-liberalism and pro-democracy rhetoric, this strategy of selecting allies according to the needs of the moment makes the United States do not have no problem supporting dictatorships if necessary to deal with other rival states. Thus, even though their diplomatic doctrine and rhetoric are based on the idealistic expansion of democracy, aiming for a possibly more stable world, on the other hand, at certain times, Washington has no problem adopting this geopolitical pragmatism, especially in the case of Eurasia and Africa, especially to prevent a single force or bloc from consolidating in the region of the so-called continental heartland through three main geostrategic axes. In the first, by ensuring its influence over Europe in the form of NATO. This prevents any European actor from becoming too powerful, to the point of contesting or challenging the leadership of the United States in the region. In the second, by encouraging divisions and hostilities in the Middle East, and in the third, in East and Southeast Asia. By partnering with local countries, also with a naval orientation that can serve as a platform for the United States to pressure or block the rise of continental Asian powers. In the case of the Americas, considered its natural sphere of influence since the establishment of the already mentioned Monroe Doctrine, unambitious, disorganized, or corrupt leaderships make it easier for the United States to project its power, which remains uncontested without requiring much effort in the region. This characteristic, unique in history, of internal self-sufficiency in most of its needs, access to the two largest, most important oceans, and land isolated from security threats. They give the United States the conditions to be the only country in the world that has the freedom to choose which wars it will fight, as well as when and how it will fight them. An extremely absurd advantage in a global scenario. However, as a consequence of this global presence, comes the high price of having to permanently maintain a large military force and having to carefully build strategic alliances, in very specific terms. In addition to the obligation of having to remain permanently at the forefront of technology, since this presence, being global, ends up being diluted and relies on the ability to quickly deploy forces that are better equipped and more technologically advanced than their rivals. In other words, the loss of technological leadership could eventually mean that new, more powerful players would emerge in specific parts of the globe, capable of regionally challenging this diluted power of the United States. In recent years, several authors have pointed out that the world's economic gravitational center has been moving away from the North Atlantic and shifting toward Asia. This could represent a possible Western decline. However, even if the economic axis shifts toward Asia, this will not necessarily mean a Western decline, but rather a European one, since the United States will continue to have direct access to and dominance over the Pacific Ocean and, as a result, to East and Southeast Asia. The United States faces numerous challenges, but its geography combined with an efficient geopolitical doctrine still manages to give the United States enough political energy to maintain its leadership. unless eventually its leaders fail to manage these aspects efficiently and repeatedly make a serious series of mistakes in their foreign and domestic policy. Thank you all. I hope you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave your comments below the video, and share it with everyone you know. Only then can I keep bringing you content about intelligence, geopolitics, history, and security. Hugs, and see you next time.